All right, welcome to Working Group API Expression. It's September the 15th of 2020, and we got an item on our agenda today. So,
do you want to start, Joe?
Yeah, sure. So we can, if anybody's willing to pop open the first atomic tags problem one. I just wanted to bring these up because they're involved and more eyes could help. So the first one is something we discovered from a bug. This is the atomic tags problem. The bug was that in Kubernetes, the label selector is marked as granular or separable, which means that each part of it is considered its own thing. You can own just a little bit of the label selector, just one field or something. That doesn't really make any sense, and it gets really confusing. There's a whole bug about all of the confusion that can happen as well as that. So it needs to be atomic, which is really easy conceptually to do. Like you can add atomic to it and it'll do the right thing. But that creates a new problem because you have pre-existing data and field sets that show ownership of these pieces of this struct from data that was written before you made it atomic. And this exists in the wild today, right? So it's a real problem we have. If we want to fix this label selector problem, we have to do something about it. The consequences of it are like you wouldn't get a conflict when you should. There'd be orphaned managed field data laying around with pretty hard to define consequences. Did I not show that, Doc? Let me make sure that's showed properly, and we'll keep going. All right, if you refresh, that should show now. And so this exists in two different ways. So one way you can run into this is the way that we run it into Kubernetes. Like you basically don't want to introduce a V2 of every type in Kubernetes to fix this problem because server-side apply is still in beta. Like that's a pretty, it's an intractable thing to do, right? Nobody's going to go for that. So we have to do it in an unversioned way. We have to say we're going to fix the mistake that we made and make label selectors atomic. So we have to somehow kind of detect that the problem has happened and then fix it. And that's actually doable. I have code that does that. It can detect that anywhere that you own the subfields of something that's atomic, clearly you had the change. Even though we don't even know what the schema was before, you can kind of infer it in a very safe way. That's one case. The other case is if you introduce a V2 of something, and as part of introducing the V2 of something, you change how you define some of the structs and say, now these ones are atomic and they weren't atomic before. That's actually should be totally safe, right? But it's not, right? Like you should be able to say, I'm introducing V2 of something, and you should just be able to change anything about the schema. And people expect that to be fine, but it turns out that that's actually a problem too. So this exists as a problem in both of those cases. And so I've figured out how to do one of the changes. Going from granular to atomic, I can do. Going from atomic to granular, it turns out it is much harder to detect. And I don't think I'm going to spend the whole time talking about it here, but it basically involves like, you kind of have to try and infer it, but you need like a bunch of information about all the field managers, the entire schema, all of the live objects. It's really complicated to do. It's like a three-way merge, right, of data. And I actually almost have it working, but it's going to be really expensive to do. And we're going to have to potentially do it on every apply because you don't know if the schema has changed. So anyways, this is turning into like a little bit of a mess. So one thing I was thinking of doing was solving the granular to atomic one now, which gets us out of the immediate problem with the field label selector and closes a bug, and then start to continue to build out documentation about why going from atomic to granular is so hard. But I just kind of wanted to surface it to people and kind of explain the problem in broader scope. If anybody has any thoughts, this document pretty well covers it. There were some alternatives we considered down below. One of them is instead of doing it instead of doing the fix-up, which I'll call this the fix-up when you detect that there was a schema change somehow, instead of doing the fix-up as part of the wide serving path, you could try and do it as like some kind of background migration task. But that runs into like a correctness problem, right? You can't handle applies on objects where they've changed safely until you fix them up. So if you do it as a background thing, then basically once the schema's changed, you have to like stop the world from applies or any writes actually until you get them fixed up. You could mitigate that still by going through and saying, well, we know which ones have been migrated and not. If it hasn't been migrated, then the online serving press could like proactively do it. But then you're getting into this really complicated implementation.
Did we discuss that last time with the idea of having a schema version hash checksum something in the field manager to know when the schema changed?
You'll see that in the alternatives. And what that does is that helps reduce the cost when nothing's changed. For example, if we built this and then I performance tested it and we found that it was super slow, like unacceptably slow, and there's nothing that we could do to do it better, we could bring up that idea as a way to optimize it. I was kind of holding off to do that until we saw like what the performance was. But even that doesn't change the kind of, that doesn't make the conversion from atomic to granular any easier. It allows you to avoid running any code when nothing's changed, and that's it.
So when you apply and the field was granular before, now it's atomic.
That one's easier, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too hard because we check for a conflict, or when we merge, we find that spot and we know it's now atomic and we can drop everything beneath and have the.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can have an arbitrarily large number of people who own the granular fields. So what happens when it becomes atomic?
So when it becomes atomic, what you do is you fix them for everybody.
As in everybody ends up owning the thing?
Yeah, and so you end up with this shared ownership situation.
Okay, cool. So you get
if the field doesn't change.
You're going to get a conflict. Somebody's going to get a conflict. There's no way out without getting a conflict.
Yeah, sure. So if you change a field, you get a conflict. If you force it, everybody gets disowned. All the subfields that are now anatomic. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it resolves pretty clearly.
For the atomic,
so
my
problem with the fact that it's not going back and forth is what happens when we have HA or like during an update, because one is going to go from granular to atomic, but from the other's perspective, it's going to look like it's going from atomic to granular.
Oh, sorry, I didn't follow the use case. So what were the conditions where this happens?
Let's say you have a new. So I'm assuming this is true for built-in types and CRDs, right?
Yeah.
So the built-in type is built inside the API server. So let's say you have a new version of the API server where it went from granular to atomic.
Yeah.
And now you update to this version of the API server, but because it's maybe an HA cluster or whatever, the upgrade is not atomic. So you end up with some API server that thinks it's atomic and some think it's granular. And so it's going to work one way, but some may see the fields as being atomic, even though, see what I'm saying? Like, you're going to transform some object from granular to atomic, and then another API server is maybe going to want to go from granular back to atomic.
Yeah, no, it could totally happen. I think it's pretty. I think it's pretty gross during it happening. I think you're just going to get a ton of conflicts. Let me look at that case too. It's probably.
Can we?
It's also that's also similar to the
try
problem
and
that you
find
did. We kind of have to deal with that anyways, because Say you have a V1 and V2, and in V2 you make something granular, and V1 it's still atomic. Then for an undefined period of time, you have some clients working against something that thinks it's atomic, and some working against something that thinks it's granular.
But there are different types, so I don't know. There are different types, so no one thinks it's the same thing, do they?
It's ideally yes, but unfortunately the way that we work with field ownership, it's kind of we do a lot of like set operations to figure out like how the field ownership was supposed to work in a different version, and then like transform that into the other version, and it doesn't really consider the granular atomic change.
Interesting.
So there's gonna be problems. I think the short of this is that like this is actually a really nasty problem. Like hidden underneath it are a lot of things that make it very hard to solve. Even if we had the previous schema, like some things get a lot better, but it's still like some of the things we mentioned aren't solved by that. Like if we had the previous schema, then you would actually know exactly what the change was, unambiguous. You'd be like, oh, they changed from atomic to granular here. We know exactly what the change was. But you still even when we're inferring that, we still run into these problems of like, what do you do in HA? What do you do in V1, V2 switches?
Yeah. Is there any way we can have a poor man's degraded mode from atomic to granular? Like, can we solve the problem in a bad way, or like in a not so great way, but at least it's kind of useful?
I think we can. I think we could do the one we need now, which is go from granular to atomic, solve the label selector problem that actually exists in Kubernetes right now.
Sure.
We can prove that the HA state might be conflict heavy briefly, but will coalesce to something sane. Like it will eventually, this is not eventual consistency, but it will eventually get sane, right?
Okay. But for this,
sanity.
we need to prove that this is kind of safe. The atomic to granular is at least not destroying.
Yeah, we need to see what's happening there. If we don't implement that, and we only implement granular to atomic, then you'll have some clients that are still like writing that as granular again, but then the upgraded ones will keep trying to transition to atomic. And once everybody's upgraded, they'll eventually agree that it's atomic. And during that period, I think you might not get conflicts when you should have, which is a little gross.
Okay, let's. Yeah,
if we just focused on that one, we might actually be able to make some real progress. I feel like if we try and take on this whole thing right now, it's a real quagmire.
If the values don't change and we go from atomic to granular, will it still cause a conflict?
The problem is if you go to atomic, then you end up owning just the top level of the record. And so then anybody that owns granular fields doesn't necessarily see that as a conflict.
Okay, yeah.
If they just own one part of the field, they don't conflict with somebody that owns just the top of it. They would if it's atomic, because like atomic means you own anything. It's all one and the same, and so that's still fine. But what I can do is I can grid out what exactly will happen, and we can look at the cases and see if there's anything that's still a real big problem, and try and at least get past this label selector upgrade.
Can we have the information that this field is owned as atomic in the managed fields? That makes sense. So at least for the time, like we have this F double point or colon thing.
That might really help. Because then if what you did is first we did an upgrade where you introduced a concept of knowing what type of ownership you have, and then as the next upgrade we allowed you to actually use it to do things, then if you know they intended for the ownership to be atomic, then you could merge in an intelligent way, even if you still saw it as granular. Let me explore that. That's a really good idea.
All right.
Okay,
Interesting
so I'll
problem.
stop there for that one. And then if we, let's see how we're doing on time. I've used 13 minutes.
We're still good.
Yeah, so tombstones, I didn't want to show everybody everything. Everybody remembers the previous one I had, but if you go down to alternatives considered, I blew out 2 examples, and I thought they were kind of interesting. And just as context, I know Antoine asked me this, so the reason that we're looking at tombstones now is not to do an implementation. It's so that if we go to GA, we can say with authority, like, this could be a post-GA task, and we know that because we know how we could implement it, which I think is something that's going to come up. One of the alternatives was, instead of modifying the way we represent the actual applied configuration, we allow appliers to write the managed fields. And by doing that, any field they claim they own here, if it doesn't exist in their object, they're effectively saying they tombstoned it. The really nice property about this is when you tombstone objects, this is the resulting field set anyway, right? This is how we're going to represent that you own something that you don't have in your object. So you're actually just doing apply on the managed fields. It's very declarative, like you're actually changing the state it's going to be in. You're not doing anything magical. It has a couple nice properties. So it has the nice property of it's very declarative, right? You're actually setting the state to what you want to see. If you read it back again, you'll actually see what you wrote, which is really nice. You're not changing the applied configuration at all. So we're not breaking the schema rules. We're not changing anything like that. The main downside of it is that it's arguably less like agronomic, right? If you're a developer and you do have to tombstone something, you do have to figure out how to write this. And it may not be super obvious how to do it. And a point that Antoine made that I agree with is you also have to put the manager in here because it's required as a key to actually be able to write the field set. So here the manager is kubectl. So that's not super great, because you could imagine if, like, you're writing these files somewhere, you might not even know what your manager is, and it could be that it's applied from by different managers into different systems. So that's actually probably the biggest, like, practical downside to this. If you write like language bindings, like if you write like a Go client that helps you do tombstone, you would never even have to worry about where this stuff goes, right? It would just happen for you, and it could even look like you were just like calling tombstone on fields. So if tombstoning is something that we're not expecting people to have to do a lot, this might be a good solution. There was a variant of the solution, which is the next alternative, which is
one interruption. I think one con is also that we would have to change how we prune managed fields right now if you don't have stuff in your object.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's add that. So that affects. The next alternative is just kind of like that one, except for instead of actually writing to the managed fields stanza, we create like a new stanza. It doesn't have to be called tombstone, but that's, just as an example, like a straw man. And you don't put the manager's name in this. You just put the fields that you want tombstoned. That's the only difference between this and the previous one. So it's just a variant on that. And then the last alternative was one that had been mentioned in a couple different ways. Antoine had mentioned it, but in a slightly different way. And I think Daniel mentioned it in exactly this way, which is you actually do YAML. You can have different parts separated by dash dash dash. So the idea was that you allow a second body in the apply request, which is the things you want tombstoned. There's the practical problems with this is there's a lot of machinery already for Kubernetes that probably doesn't understand that you are allowed to have a dash 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 here. So we'd probably break a lot of tooling doing this. It's a little easier to write because you're kind of using the object structure. I'm not a huge fan of this approach. I feel like it feels a little bit magical. There's some variants on this approach. One approach would be like, instead of having it be a separate thing, you have it be like a sub-resource or something, but then you lose atomicity you can't actually, like this way you can actually tombstone fields and change things all in one request, which is a good property.
I think my favorite is the second approach, especially because like now it's the same format as we have to manage fields, but we could make it more user-friendly to define as well. Like we could have some JSON path syntax or something, or actual YAML, like the actual object as well in there.
Good point. There's nothing preventing us from doing that inside of there. Okay, what I think I'm going to do with this is I'm going to definitely comment on the ones you like, in addition to what you say in this meeting. I'm probably going to swap out the leading design with one of these recommendations, and then what we'll probably do is shelve this design, and I think what we'll do at that point is when we talk about GA, we'll kind of use this as a reference for why we think we have because like this one, for example, you could implement this post GA, right? There's nothing breaking about this, right? It's purely additive. We could then argue that this could be a post GA task if we want.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the feedback. I got a couple of useful things.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks. All right, then. Nobody else wants to add something? We have work items.
Okay, let's talk about GA.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one more.
You forgot about me.
So sorry.
Okay, so we need to SIG API machinery is trying to decide if what's going to happen soon in API machinery. And so obviously the question of server-side apply is coming up. And we need to know, Daniel was suggesting or asking if we were planning on making server-side apply GA for 121. I think the next release is going to be 120, if I'm correct.
Yep.
Yeah. We definitely need some time to soak the features if needed. So that's something to remember. And eventually we want to land in GA. I don't think we want server-side apply to not be GA for too long. Joe has done this process of going for GA in the past. It's not like I haven't with dry run and diff with Julian, but I'm expecting some inputs from Joe because the CRDs were significantly more difficult.
Yeah, happy to do that.
But so can you describe some of the requirements or what we have to define and discuss?
Yeah, so I had actually asked Daniel this exact same question when I started, and he said the first precondition to going to GA is to figure out what the requirements are to go to GA, and that's like actually really hard. Some of the things that I didn't expect that ended up being really important was you have to get conformance to a certain level. So you're going to dedicate quite a bit of manpower to defining, agreeing on, and getting written and approved and committed a bunch of conformance tests around your feature to make sure that it's implemented by other, that anybody that says they're a compliant certified Kubernetes distribution actually has the functionality that you expect. That took a lot of time. There was quite a bit of focus on things like performance and scalability. So like we had to be fairly crisp on like how did we think about scalability and performance? Like how did we like map that back to the way that the rest of like SIG scalability thinks about things? So we talked to SIG scalability for quite a bit of time, made sure we understood like what their guarantees were, mapped them back to CRDs, and everything ended up being like you could have so many CRDs of different things and so forth. And it was that was a fairly involved project. I don't think we're gonna have as much of a scale one, but we'll probably like want to like resurrect some of our performance numbers. There was quite a bit of work on like bug burn down to like get things to where they needed to be. We did some like user surveys around certain things. So we did some around scalability, basically asking people like how many of various like CRD objects do they have like per namespace and all this stuff as a way of like defending that. I think part of going to GA is like you have to prove to the right stakeholders that this is not just GA in terms of implementation quality, but GA in terms of like usage, right? Are there enough people using this thing that it should be part of core, so to speak? Those were some of the big ones. Some of the bugs. Oh, go ahead.
Did you have any features requirement, like features that were missing and very important?
Yeah, so for example, CRDs going to GA, versioning had to be fully fleshed out. CRD versioning was like a big, like partially incomplete thing. So we had to like change the way this custom resource definition objects were structured so you could have multiple versions, so you could have conversion webhooks. So the conversion webhooks were all like set up and secured, TLS, all the things that you would expect from a webhook. There was a whole push around like metrics and instrumentation. So we added like a bunch of Prometheus metrics to CRDs to get them to the level of quality we needed. So we had to kind of like work with SIG instrumentation on that, make sure that they were okay with it. They felt that was complete. There was a fairly substantial burn down. One of the hardest things was getting agreement on like what the remaining like bug and feature gaps were. Those two lists were like pretty serious, and there's a lot of back and forth, like SIG API machinery on like, you know, there was a major complaint about webhook ordering for webhooks, and this is serious webhooks. And so like we ended up with this solution that nobody loved, but in practice like actually solved a lot of people's problems, which is like we would just run them all twice because we didn't know what the order was going to be. And so you said they have to be adipident, and we're just going to run them twice. So there was some kind of like trade-offs that we had to find, but I think identifying those and convincing everybody that like we had the list was a big part, and we kind of had to champion it. Like you couldn't just ask people what your list had to be; you had to propose the list to people and then like advocate for it. And one thing that really helped that I should mention is we very explicitly had a post-GA list on the doc. And in our post-GA list, what we would do is we would call out all the things that, yes, we agreed need to be done at some point, but don't necessarily need to be part of GA. And our criteria for GA was like, it's needed for the feature to be useful. And it's something that we can't change without like breaking backwards compatibility in some way. Because once you go to GA, you really lock down your API. Like that's now a forever API. And so being able to like show that like, yeah, that's important. It's a really nice feature. But people are using CRDs today, and they would really benefit from having a V1. And if we don't give them a V1 because of that, that's actually not in their service, right? Like we can add that post GA, and it will still be it'll still be just as good as it was now, and there's no reason why it can't be added post GA. So that list, building that list and then advocating that a bunch of stuff belonged in it was actually really helpful, because that allowed us to focus on the stuff that really needed to. It allowed us to kind of like narrow and focus in on just GA work.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like we should compile. Thanks. Yeah, like we should compile a list of, or a fleshed out list of issues, and then put them in the categories like stuff we need to do and stuff we have problems with.
Yeah, and there was like getting bug burned down. Also, start to send out like. I think what you want to do is you want to get a document that is a skeleton of what you want, and then just let the community help you fill it out as much as you can.
Okay, cool. I suggest we go through the status update, but keeping an eye on these specifically. So for each item, we discuss about the GA aspect of that.
Sounds good.
Of each item. And if anything's missing, ideally nothing is missing from the items. But if we can think of things that need to be done and that we don't have in the list, then maybe we should add them to the list. So let's do that at the end. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we have the administrivia part of the document somewhere. Working group administrivia. So this GA, I'm gonna add it right now. Create GA graduation document. Okay, let's go through the update.
Okay, zero value normalization. Antoine, that's on you.
How am I starting? I'm still working on that. The more I work on that, the more difficult it is. I'm literally working on that. The problem is still that built-in and CRDs are not the same. And if we want to have something that makes sense, we want them to be as similar as possible. But I don't know if we even understand properly what the differences are. And so I'm trying to investigate and work on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do the defaults. The defaults should be very easy if we solve the other problem. I mean, the two are very tightly related. I'm trying to not make them be the same so that we can simplify the process. But at some point, we're almost considering merging these two together because they're so tightly coupled. But I'd rather not do that.
Right.
Yeah, we simply need defaulting to do that.
we have a software chain up here.
Hey, okay. I'm trying to simplify everything into individual tasks.
Yeah, status wiping. I think a week ago I had some short time to push something, but I remember my last 2 weeks were way too full. There's still stuff that's waiting for review. Like you can look at it, and I still need to do the pod util stuff, sadly. But it should be mostly finished.
Okay, cool. That's good to know.
API clients.
Jenny and I worked on an early prototype of kind of like what the generated code would look like. So I need to keep working with Jenny on this. One question I had though, because we're talking about GA, and we haven't made too much progress in the actual thing, but I'm not clear if we want this for GA or not. One of the reasons I say is when we went to SIG API machinery, the guidance was don't build something in K8s. Go experiment elsewhere. See if you can prove value with the developer community, which made me wonder if SIG API machinery really wants this as part of like a GA prerequisite.
I mean, when I look at it, I can hear you say before, like, we shouldn't block GA because we don't have that. It's good to have, and we think we should have that, but there is no reason to block the feature from going GA because we don't have that.
Yeah, I think we should argue for that. I think we should still keep working on it, but I think we should make that argument.
It wouldn't block using the feature.
No, it wouldn't. And it's not clear. It's not clear to us yet that that the majority of developers that are getting value out of it need that right now. We might get more developers later from it, maybe, but we don't know.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Okay, so we can mark that one as post GA, and I'll talk to SIG API machinery and let them know we're thinking that way.
Yeah. For information, we are now in the Java client supported Java client. I saw that merged. So okay. Java client can now support server-side apply. I think by just sending YAML, I looked at it for a bit.
Okay.
That's exciting. Can we, if we're done with this item, can we go back to the previous items and discuss the GA graduation properties?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we forgot. My mistake.
It's all right.
Let's go backwards. Status wiping.
Right? That's GA.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it is, yeah.
Yeah. And since we're probably going to get it in anyways, why not take the win?
The defaulting is absolutely all my 3 tasks are absolutely required for GA. But so it's important to discuss that because I believe we need them in GA, and they should probably suck a little bit of time. Probably not too much. So I'd say if we manage to make this in 120, I don't think that would be blocking from making it to GA in 121.
Yeah, 121 sounds like a good goal.
I think it's a little ambitious, but I think we should go for it.
Yeah, it might be, but it's still almost a year. I don't know.
No, that's
Yeah, let's try for it.
Let's try.
So those all are done. Okay. We just had tombstoning. Do we consider tombstoning GA required?
No, that's not GA. The proposals that we just looked at could all be added post GA without breaking anything.
Yeah. The plan thing, I didn't see anything new there, and not GA. No.
Yeah, it's not even core feature really.
Yeah, that's kind of
cool, documentation is kind of GA requirement.
It's a big GA requirement. I totally missed it on the list. We should add it.
But that's a different task case.
Yeah, this is API convention, so it's not strictly server-side apply. I agree. Let's talk about the topology instead. I suspect the topology documentation is required. The other one is not SSA specific.
Yeah. Especially if we want it to be used in CRDs, it would be. And we should probably support them.
Yeah, that seems right to me.
This is so much work, there's no way we can do it in 121, by the way, but yeah. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Well, we can try and break it down further, maybe. But for now, let's mark it as blocking, but some research.
Let's look at these bugs. Miscellaneous is mostly bugs, so that's good.
Yeah, the structural schema thing, I don't know if anything happened there.
No, and but this issue in general is blocking, because this is literally breaking people from using server-side apply in some cases.
Okay. So we need to do something about that.
Is this all merged now? It might be.
No, it's been blocked by the lack of milestone label.
Okay.
Which I do not quite understand. I was asking Jordan a few minutes ago. Do we need to? I'm gonna ask Daniel to tag that for 120 because we need that anyway.
Okay. API service should be blocking. Oh, what? Stop pasting. Stop pasting. Middle click is horrible on Linux.
I think so. What do you have an opinion, Joe? You can server-side apply API services because they're not set up the same way as other resources.
I'm honestly not even sure what API service does.
Is this the aggregated API servers?
It's
okay. Yeah.
I feel like I feel like I need to research this one. My hope is that we could not do it in GA, but I don't know.
We can argue it's not needed somehow. I mean, I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the failure case?
Added later.
Does it just not apply? Does it give an error? What's the complete error we get?
I don't even know if we install the. That needs to be investigated. Okay, that's a good point.
Investigation. yeah, I feel like if somebody argued that it should be GA right now, I wouldn't be able to refute it very well.
I know.
I'd be like, yeah, you're making a good point. I just don't want to do it.
I mean, that's also a good reason.
Yeah, that's
think,
what we talked
yeah,
about
I think
before.
we are going to agree that this is needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not in scope.
Yeah, I agree.
There might be GA required on the performance side, scalability side.
That's a good point. That hopefully not, because this is going to be another big chunk of work, to be honest.
No change applies to persist.
Oh, it's saying string stuff. Oh my god. Yeah.
Oh, yuck.
Yeah, if you send an int, it's going to be canonicalized to a string, and we're going to think there is a change every single time.
I see.
So we need to be able to canonicalize earlier in server-side apply or somewhere before that. And ideally, this is part of the open API, so we know how to, but it's kind of difficult because we would need to know how the canonicalize function works inside the open API definition. And I mean, yeah, we don't have any such thing. Ideally, we don't have too many places where we do canonicalization of this sort, because they are bad, right? Anytime we change the object after it's being sent, we run into this problem.
Yeah.
So ideally, we can prevent people from having these kind of ideas.
Yeah, int or string is one of the, yeah.
Also, I don't see how this is different from a mutating webhook. What if the canonicalization was done by a mutating webhook? We would always have this problem, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So, I mean, technically anyone can build a system that is going to be broken in such a way, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And why do we need them to persist? Is it because that otherwise we don't end up like recording field ownership? Is that the problem?
Yeah, so we compare the object against the new object against the live object, and let's say the live object has a string, the new applied object has an int. Even though the int would be canonicalized to the same string, we're like, oh, you're trying to change the object. And so we record that inside the timestamp date.
Yeah.
And so because we changed the manage fields date, we do persist the object.
I see.
So ideally, maybe we could improve the way we compute this the date, because I feel like if we're not
But we decode the object using the Kubernetes decoder, don't we? Oh no, we go to unversioned.
my problem here is that nothing in the manage fields changed beside the fact that we changed the date of when this was applied, and I don't know if that's correct. There might be some easy work around here.
Yeah, we shouldn't change the date if the managed fields didn't change.
Right. But right now we decide if we need to update the date based on has the object changed or not.
And
but
would
that's
we
a
have a
good point.
problem if we looked for the managed field change? Because we also shouldn't update the timestamp if we have status wiping involved, like if we ignore fields. And those won't be reflected in the managed fields, and the object would still change technically.
Ooh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, I think this one right
better.
now, yeah, I think it's in until we can at least figure out what parts of it need to be solved.
We can also put an investigate if it's really
I
a
mean,
problem.
we need, yeah. How did I write that? To be investigated. This one absolutely needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
Quantity fail stop checking, because if you receive an int, I think it completely fails server-side apply, because it's like you sent an int and it needs to be a
Yeah, that's just a straight up
string.
bug. You don't fix it. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we had solved that problem initially. I can definitely remember working with Daniel on these specifically, so I'm very surprised.
I remember something about it as well, yeah.
This one is not in SSA scope, I think. I mean, it's not blocking. Andrea sent an update in the Slack channel about that. I'm gonna make the update for him, but Jordan found out that this bug was not because of server-side apply. Yay!
Oh, cool.
But it's still confusing for many reasons. So we need to update something so that it's not that confusing, and the documentation.
Okay.
I'm not gonna go in the details of what's going on because I can't remember them all. But it's nothing bad, and it's I'm going to say it's not even necessary.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Validation schema is probably not blocking.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, this is like,
this is not even
a server-side apply specific thing. I would say not in SSA scope. It's
yeah.
working group scope, but not server-side apply scope.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. There's definitely something missing here that absolutely needs to be solved. I suspect needs to be solved. What about? So let's go through the backlog very quickly because it's not as critical, but there might be things interesting. This is not SSA.
Yep.
Remove manage field from this is not blocking. This one is not blocking. I suspect this one might be blocking.
Yeah.
Joe, in case you don't remember, if you
I
do a scale,
yeah,
if you do a scale on the deployment, it's not going to track the replicas, and I think that sucks big time.
Yeah, I think from like a GA perspective, like we actually have to look this one in the eye and deal with it.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why we made server-side apply the way it is, right? It's because we want to be able to see if you're applying the replicas, even though the HPA is tracking it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a real use case. I think if it precludes us from like allowing the controller to switch to apply, then that's a problem.
Not even that, just like if you have an HPA and you should have a conflict with the HPA and you're not going to get one today.
Oh, that's even worse. Yeah, it's a really good point. You're just not going to get the conflict.
Which is
unions, SSA
clearly a
scope.
bug. So union is not, immutability is not.
I agree.
Admission controllers, I think, is not blocking.
Shouldn't be, right?
I mean, yeah, we don't know what to do with that, and I don't think it's gonna be super. So, yeah, the question is would this break the backwards compatibility?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to think about this one. I've worked on admission controllers, so I can own this.
Do you remember what this means?
Okay.
I do.
This is do we want to track managed fields for admission controllers? Like, and this is relevant to the quantity thing. Like, do we want to track what changes are made by admission controllers?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
That's
okay. That's a little more subtle than I was originally thinking.
Yeah, the cap we had tried to assign a field manager based on the webhook or admission controller and own the fields, but the problem was back then scalability. Like we had scalability problems, and we need to run the apply multiple times, and that was a big issue back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, because back then tracking the fields was very expensive, so we couldn't just run the tracking for every single mutating webhook. There's also the possibility of running it once and say this is admission controllers in general that made these changes. Having the specific details of like, hey, who has changed this field? Oh, it's actually this mutating webhook. That's actually very useful, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are implications in doing that. I'd be curious, to be honest. Like, if we could actually see the performance impact of doing that, that'd be interesting. But we also need to think of the consequences for like conflicts and stuff.
Yeah. All right. So this might require at least like a straw man design before we go to GA to at least know what it would look like.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
What it would look like and what would be the consequences on backwards compatibility. Like, if we end up doing that, is this going to break anything?
Yeah. Same thing we did for tombstones. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have a cap we can work from if you want to investigate it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Like that went pretty far until we hit performance problems on a different day.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay.
Okay. I think we are done. Have we missed anything? I want to mention, so we have
CLI related that we need for GA? CLI? Like
I was about to ask the same thing. Yeah, is there anything on like the travel side that we are missing?
Yeah, I thought about that a little bit when the question of GA came up. Do we need or want to do anything sort of cleanups from flags in kubectl? Do we want to make? I'm assuming that having server-side apply not being the default is fine for GA.
Yeah.
In kubectl, but is there any sort of like flags cleanup that we need to do?
Because we have all the functionality, right? So it would just be like, yeah, there's got to be something, right? There's at least somebody needs to do a review and say like, this is how we want like the GA version of this to look. Flag setting, defaults.
The discussion, if it should remain apply, kind of settled down, right? You made this issue a while ago. We're sticking with apply. Was the result, I think.
That's great. I hope so.
I think if I had to give my quick opinion on that, how do I do that? I think Julian and I have done a ton of work on this already. And Julian has been really on top of everything for that. So any experience glitch that we've seen on server-side apply so far has been tackled extremely quickly. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is actually fine. I mean, beside maybe the fact that people are frustrated with the managed fields being too verbose in gets and stuff, but beside that, I think the experience has been somewhat polished already. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have anything. I'd be curious about going over the flags again, because we have like many flags and they conflict with client-side apply flags. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is mostly good.
That's great. Yeah. I remember when we were talking to SIG API My Machinery, one of the questions we had was, like, should we be converting controllers to be using apply? And the answer I seemed to get there was that like most of the built-in controllers were not going to change. So I think if anybody asks during JAF, we should be like migrating controllers or things. I think the answer should be no. Does everybody agree with that?
I would be so surprised if this was worth the effort.
Yeah, that's kind of the is like in the future when new things get introduced, you can switch. And if you're doing like a major rehaul, then go for it. But like, we're not going to go back and do all these.
I would go further and say I wouldn't expect anyone to do it before we have the client, a good client for it.
Yeah, that's a good
Even
point.
then, I mean, why would you do that? We have so many things to do. If you have time
Not
to
migrate, yeah.
rewrite your controllers, maybe you should be doing something else.
Help us.
If there's one that actually like benefits really specifically from being able to do apply, then sure, if it makes your life easier.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. But in general. Okay, cool. I think we're done and we are right on time.
Great.
Perfect.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Antoine.
Yeah.
It's coming along.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, exciting.
Yeah. Best meeting of the week so far.
So far.
See you.